when in Rome. Shh. You feel that? That's the winds of change, baby. And Fantastic's...
So there's this group of criminals who've made the strip their home. They call themselves omertas, which is Italian for dickheads, but no one knows because they usually get shot to death within a few minutes of meeting the world's shootiest mailman. Sopranos cosplayers, the omertas may seem to be a group of mismatched, poorly thought out, fedora-wearing morons, but I promise you if you can get past this asshole without shooting him in the face, there are some really cool things and some pretty deep writing going on here. So let's take a look at it. Gomorrah, much like the cardinal sin it represents, has a facade, and of course the Gomorrah, the building itself, is a literal facade. While perhaps not as insidious as other casinos, it says a lot about the omertas, and even of the strip itself. The omertas who inhabit this facade share many traits from the pre-war culture they attempt to emulate. They have a very distinct way of acting about their sins, if you will. While the display of lust they share with their pre-war counterparts is near equal, their insidious malevolence and intention to hide their lust of wealth and power is almost an admission of their guilt. This is a unique trait that I feel a lot of the others don't have. Like the tops, for instance, which may tout pride as a virtue, don't tend to see it as such of a sin worth hiding. Gomorrah has a much more Machiavellian approach to the way it deals with the outside world. So although the strip's casinos were all written with the intent to display a deadly sin, the Gomorrah has a lot more than one. Like, a real Kachino's going to hell cocktail. Sorry, Kachino.
Dickweed.
Although not explicitly sins, I feel that the Gomorrah exhibits these qualities. Now, any idiot with a YouTube channel can tell you about the lust in Gomorrah. Their YouTube channels. So with its slot machines, hookers, alcohol and drugs, and in fact the Gomorrah is one of the only casinos where you can purchase drugs, Gomorrah is definitely the den of vice you would think it would be. It's in the name. Gomorrah literally meaning den of vice. So that much is obvious, but I want to take a look at a few other traits that I think make up the Gomorrah and the omertas on a more fundamental but ultimately less visible level. There's a running sickness deep in Gomorrah. The place absolutely reeks of the exploitation wherever you look. Vixel and Gomorrah are practically stuffing their hookers' faces with chems. You've got Clarendon recording snuff films in the basement, got gun smuggling, debt collection, all the typical things that you'd expect to see. The Cosa Nostra themselves were also guilty of this, but while they kept their sins in secrecy, the intentions they had behind closed doors were equally corrupt. When the omertas attempt to emulate their culture, from how they dress right down to how they talk, there is still this ever-creeping feeling of showmanship. Everything that the Gomorrah is doing here is a farce. They're steadfast in hiding their less palatable intentions, as if they do not want the outside world to see. So the Gomorrah is named after the biblical city of Gomorrah. It's a place of wickedness and vice, but there are a few other things going on here that I think are just a bit more than a coincidence. So we come up to this guy and we tell him to shove it, and we head upstairs to the Zawara Club. We find it's a private area for omertas only. Its naming is based on the city of Zawara. The story goes that Zawara was spared from fire and brimstone after God sought to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for their sin. He seemed to be quite keen on that, Fire and brimstone kind of worked, but I digress. Take a look at the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. We can see a whole lot of parallels between it and a quest called How Little We Know. To illustrate what I mean, I'll briefly explain the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So, the story begins when God himself orders for Sodom and Gomorrah to be destroyed with fire and brimstone for their lust. He saw them as a den of vice. His two angels head to the gates of Sodom. They're appearing as men. Like somehow. So upon arriving, the two angels would meet Lot, nephew of Abraham. Lot would invite the two angels to his home, and in the middle of the night, the people would get angry. In the middle of the night, like they saw he was there, somehow, like they knew something. So anyway, the entire town turns up and they want to rape the two angels. Look, just go with me, okay? It's a biblical story, like it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I promise, just bear with me. So they really want to rape the two angels, and Lot, with his values, decides that he really wants to protect them, like it's his duty. So instead, Lot decides to offer up his two daughters to be raped by the entire town instead. So it's a biblical story, it's not entirely coherent, but the point is that Lot is now in a position where he can hand the men over. Instead of doing that, he could offer his own family to take the fall, which he already tried. If we take a look at Kachina and the Omertas, we can see a very similar situation after the courier steals Kachina's diary. Now, Kachina's not going to be raped, although we kind of wish he would be. The moral question still persists here. Does the courier offer the diary to Big Sal and allow the Gomorrah to continue as usual minus Kachina? Or does he give it to Kachina and risk being on the bad side of the bosses? Just as Lot had to make his decision blind, the courier also had no idea who the good people in this situation are. So before we get to the final act of wrath upon the sinful city, let's talk about the last thing Lot does before the bombing of Sodom and Gomorrah. So long story short, Lot escapes Sodom before it gets stomped faster than my civilization in a multiplayer game of Age of Empires. So this is maybe one of the least convincing arguments I have here, but if we make a little stretch, we could conclude that the idea of escape may have been replicated in Bye Bye Love. Joanna may not be aware of it. She's escaping a strip that's about to face retribution for its alleged sins. I may be clutching at straws with these comparisons, but here's one final part that I think is solid. So if you haven't played to the end of New Vegas, firstly, I highly recommend you do, but aside from that, I'm about to basically spoil all of Gomorrah and give you no reason to ever want to go there again. Not that you ever did, but you'll never talk to Kashino, so I likely did you a favour. But anyway, moving on. If you'd read how the story of biblical Sodom and Gomorrah ends, you could almost predict what the Omerta's plan is, especially after finding out who the real conspirator is. So if the biblical story is to end with God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah for their wickedness and sin and hellfire, and if the parallels I've drawn here are not incidental, then New Vegas will see its own version of the story play out. But as much as the Omertas would like to be, they're absolutely not godlike. So there needs to be some kind of megalomaniac with godlike delusions of grandeur, somewhere nearby, who's well versed in literature and willing to lay waste to an entire city for its wickedness. Someone who's biblical? Perhaps someone that was religious. With a taste for conspiracy?
We will revive civilization and reverse this hurtling, runaway, 900-mile-an-hour train going up into the side of a mountain.
Okay, but in seriousness, this is where the stories come together and what I think is an undeniable parallel. Caesar literally sees himself to be a god. As far as he's concerned, he is a literal god. So as it would play out in the biblical story also, he intends to send his angels disguised as men, the Frumentari, to Gomorrah, before blasting the strip with hellfire for its sinfulness. Because the depths of their moral corruption are so steadfast in Hegelian dialectics and mild sickness, thesis and antithesis. So if you're one of the 12 people who made it this far in the video, YouTube says that this is the part where I'm meant to panda or something. I looked it up. Yeah, press the thumb up button or some shit.